George W. Bush, of all people, is at the center of today's story, right between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, in what I think has the potential to be the biggest breaking story between now and Election Day, and I have it for you next. Personally, my favorite part of this election cycle has been the number of Republicans who have spoken out against Donald Trump. Trump had a stranglehold on the party for most of the last 10 years, and it was political suicide to speak out against him, so many prominent Republicans found themselves somewhere on the spectrum between biting their tongues until they bled and falling in line with support of Trump to gain favor, access funding, and to appeal to that massive MAGA voting bloc. The wall of intellectual dishonesty was built high and strong for Trump, but there have been some notable defiant Republican critics who took the slings and arrows for others. Mitt Romney, Liz Cheney, the Lincoln Project come to mind. Will George W. Bush join that list? I will tell you what I know in just a minute, but first, speaking of Liz Cheney, a New York Times article published just today said that she plans to weigh in the weeks to come with a possible endorsement of Harris. And the article goes on to say that if elected, she, being Harris, would name a Republican to her cabinet. Miss Cheney's name immediately began trending on social media, and hopefully I can bring you those breaking stories another day. Meanwhile, back to prominent people on the right moving to the left. Watch as Newsmax commentator Greg Kelly almost breaks into tears while listing the latest wave of Republican defectors.
More than 200 Bush, McCain, Romney alums endorse Harris for president and criticize Trump, going out of their way to do this. And let's look at their endorsement of Harris. I mean, this is unnecessary. We jointly declare that we're voting for Vice President Kamala Harris and Governor Tim Walz this November. Abroad, Democratic movements will be irreparably jeopardized as Trump and his acolyte J.D. Vance kowtow to dictators like Vladimir Putin while turning their backs on our allies. We can't let that happen. You know, like they're not going to let it happen, right? They're not going to let it happen. 200 people from the swamp signed this letter. And remind you something, right? When people come together and sign letters when they're in the swamp, a couple of names are, well, not that noteworthy, but the titles are interesting. Let's put them up one by one, if you don't mind. 200 rhinos, and leading with the following. Christopher Barton, Director, National Security Council, Chief Counsel for the House Permanent Select Committee, Committee on Intelligence, George W. Bush Administration. What a swamp dweller, huh? I mean, this is textbook swamp. Jeffrey Bobeck, Director of External Affairs at the Department of Energy for George W. Bush. Thanks, Jeffrey. I'm surprised at this one. Daniel Connor, Presidential Helicopter for Marine One. Hey, fly the helicopter, and that's it. We don't want to hear this stuff. And Ann Dixon, intern. They had interns sign these letters. It does remind you, though, of the Hunter Biden. This is bogus, right? I mean, they don't know what they're talking about. These are swamp people in it for themselves.
And now, what about George W. Bush? Normally something that you might categorize as rumor or conjecture would not qualify as breaking news, but in this case, the source of the conjecture is exactly why it is breaking news. Watch as that same whiny host of the extreme right, Newsmax, drops the bombshell about Bush.
Guess who might just be on the fence and thinking about endorsing Kamala Harris? George W. Bush. Remember that guy? Yeah. Word is he's contemplating an endorsement of Kamala Harris. There was a rumor during the DNC that there was some momentum that he was going to do it during the DNC. And now there's speculation that he might do it before the election at some point. What a disgrace. How dare he? After what he brought this country through and what we're going through right now, things that he doesn't have to deal with because he's rich and he's ensconced in a cocoon of comfort. The rest of us have to deal with this stuff. There are big signs that the Republican Party, I mean, the establishment, the Rhino, the country club set, are doing all they can to help Kamala.
Like I said, I think if George W. came out against Trump and in favor of Harris, it could be the single greatest story between now and Election Day. It would not only be historic, but it would send shockwaves through the mega base because it would inspire a few more intellectually honest Republicans to cross over and deny Trump any chance of winning in key battleground states. For the longest time, I felt like the battle was us versus them, and now it feels like it's us and them versus them, and that feels good. I'm Dan for Occupy Democrats, and I'll leave you with a final thought. Just imagine if George W. Bush does endorse Kamala Harris. Not only will it be perhaps the final nail in the Trump campaign coffin, but we can look forward to the cavalcade of unintentionally comical insults that will surely follow.
George Bush.
He looks different than he used to. He acts different than he used to.
George Bush
is a radical left Democrat and always will be. Who would say a thing like that? Only an animal would say a thing like that.
George Bush.